Okay, looks like we have a good crowd. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Ghatika Monthly, where we gather every month to explore different topics related to contemplative practice. I'm Courtney Johnson. I'm the executive director for the CCR, the Center for Contemplative Research. I'm joined by Clara Seeger, who will be leading our session today, and Griffin Cunningham, who has helped facilitate this session, put together a lot of things behind the scenes. So thank you. I'm just going to give a little preamble to Clara's presentation. Wanted to tell you a little about what we do here at the CCR for our audience today, in case there's anyone new, and in case people are viewing this in our YouTube or on our digital library that we have online later once it's posted there. So in general, the premise of this CCR is really that this vast array of conditions that interrelate and generate a lot of the problems we face as humanity, problems that seem to be converging into a really kind of compounded crisis at the moment. A lot of these really have their roots in our minds. We all have mental afflictions or negative and distorted lenses through which we see reality that impact our actions and intentions. And whether intentionally or in many cases unintentionally, end up harming ourselves and others. And maybe a corollary to that is that perhaps the solutions to these great challenges also lie in our minds. So if we can better understand our minds, the nature of consciousness, the potential of consciousness, we can better understand and unlock well-being for ourselves and for others. So our mission is fathom the mind, heal the world. And that's what we're trying to do with all of our kind of vectors of impact at the CCR, which is split into three domains: Mind Labs, research, and education. You can read more about Mind Labs and education on our website, but I'm going to focus on research for just a moment today because that's really relevant to what Clara is going to discuss today, um, and to some other developments at the CCR recently. So historically, most research in meditation and mindfulness has focused on third-person data, measures of the physical impacts or other kinds of measurements, EEG, that kind of stuff, external measures, and has focused on short-term analysis among relatively inexperienced meditators, like college students and so on, who are trying pretty basic interventions. And we've taken a little different tack here at the CCR. We've had a pilot study running in different phases at the CCR since our inception at the Crestone Center in 2020. And that study takes a mixed methods approach. So that includes not just third person measurements, but first and second person data collection and analysis as well. So in this mixed methods research, reports from individual meditators themselves and from observers and teachers help us understand the third person EEG data that we're also collecting. So this pilot study yielded our first published scientific paper at the CCR, which was published just in the past couple weeks, in Frontiers in Psychology. And this is a pretty important moment for the CCR because the fact that this paper describing this methodology in a case study is quite novel, that this is accepted into publication. And so we're happy about that. We'll put a link to the paper in the chat if you want to learn more about that. Um, but the point I'd like to make is that contemplative science really includes the impressions and analyses that both we and others can make about our minds. And today, Clara is going to give us an introduction to one of these methodologies, which is micro-phenomenology, and take us on a journey of learning about contemplative science through our own practice. Contemplative skills, like any skills, have to be honed over time as we train our minds, but that training is accessible to us even now in our practice. And so Clara will talk more about that. She's an esteemed colleague who's worked with the CCR over the years. She's a wonderful contributor. She already has one PhD. She's in the middle of a second PhD with a focus on contemplative science. Leads meditation and coaching and leadership trainings in a variety of settings through her organization, Enlightened Minds, and has a focus recently on micro-phenomenology. And so without further ado, I will let Clara take it from here. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and welcome everyone to this Ghatika session on how to observe the meditating mind by applying microphenomenology to our daily practice. I'm really delighted and honored to have this opportunity to be back here with everyone at the CCR and practice together, learn together, and connect with our CCR Sangha. So welcome everyone to this session. Let me see. So let me give you firstly a brief overview of how the session will unfold, how I sort of envisage this going. First of all, I'd like to share with you the objectives of this session, which is to explore in some detail what it's like to meditate by first doing a familiar practice that some of you will be very familiar with, and then to explore our experience of this practice through the method of micro-phenomenology, which I will introduce as we go along. So first, I'll provide a brief introduction to a practice that will be familiar to a lot of you, but maybe not to all, and it's the practice of settling the mind in its natural state, which is a practice I personally love to do, and I do on a daily basis. So I find it very transformative, and the people I've introduced to this practice, especially in the workplace and private individuals with a secular background, find this practice very, very useful. So I think it's a wonderful practice to use for today's exploration, and it goes very well with the method of micro-phenomenology, as you will see as we do it. So I will then guide us in this practice in a sort of Ghatika, maybe a slightly shortened Ghatika, because we'll have two practices today, and so we'll do about a 20-minute practice. Then I will give you a short introduction to the method of micro-phenomenology as a first-person qualitative research method. And then we will conduct a microphenomenological inquiry into our experience of settling the mind in its natural state in the form of another guided meditation. And to conclude, we'll have some time to explore and discuss and ask questions and just explore our experience of this whole session. So let's delve in. So this practice of settling the mind in its natural state, it entails observing our mind with a keen interest in the phenomena we encounter, but without the habitual tendencies of getting carried away with whatever comes up in our mind, of grasping to it, identifying with it, or appropriating it. And this practice is also known by other names, like shamatha, focus on the mind, taking the mind as the path, or taking appearances and awareness as the path. So without compromising the stillness of awareness that we cultivate, we observe in this practice, we observe the movements of the mind, and the aim is to observe them as mental events rather than thinking about the contents of whatever arises. And there are different the variations of this practice with different emphases, some more on the phenomena that we are observing, some more on the stillness of awareness from which we are observing. The variation I want to bring to you today is by Lerard Blinkber, and he instructs us as follows: whatever kinds of mental imagery occur, be they gentle or violent, subtle or coarse, of long or short duration, strong or weak, good or bad, observe their nature and avoid any obsessive evaluation of them as being one thing and not another. And whenever you meditate, bear in mind the phrase, without distraction and without grasping. So distraction is this attentional hyperactivity when we get carried away with the mental phenomena that we're observing, thinking about them, and going off on a sort of virtual mind-wandering episode. And without grasping means not identifying with the subjective mental states that come up in this process as well. So this is a shamatha method, and shamatha is by definition a selective type of practice where we are focusing only on one object, and this object in this practice is the sixth domain of experience, which is the mental domain. So according to Buddhist epistemology, there are five sensory domains of the visual, the auditory, the olfactory, the gustatory, and the tactile, and then there is the sixth domain, which is the mental domain. So in this practice, we are deselecting the 5 sensory domains. We are not showing any interest in them, although appearances will, of course, still come to our awareness. We're not going blind, we're not going deaf, we're still getting some signal from these domains, but we're not paying any attention to them. So we are only paying attention single pointedly to the mental domain, and that means the space of the mind and whatever appearances occur within this space. And just to share that, I think it's important to realize that when we say selective, it doesn't mean narrow. And I think that's something that I've seen I think, misunderstood in some of the contemplative science literature that I've come across, where there seems to be the implication that focused attention is only is a very narrow kind of focus, but obviously the space of the mind and all the activities that arise within this space are a rather big domain. So we are focusing all of that, but only on that. And as always in shamatha practice, we're cultivating 2 mental faculties, that of mindfulness, which is our ability to bear in mind an object with which we're familiar, and the faculty of introspection, which is the faculty of monitoring our own state of the state of our body and our mind. And in meditation specifically, this means detecting any attentional imbalances by kind of providing a quality control to our mindfulness. So while mindfulness is focused on the space of the mind and whatever arises within it, the object of introspection is the quality of attention with which we're observing the mind. So introspection is focused on mindfulness, mindfulness is focused on the mental domain. And Lama Allen often uses the metaphor of the cinema of the mind, which I find very practical, relatable, and makes a lot of sense to me. So I created a visual on this. So when we go to the cinema of the mind, as it were, which is a nice metaphor for this practice, we can expect to encounter 2 different types of experience. So there are 2 broad categories of mental events that we encounter in this cinema. When we go to the cinema of the mind, there are the appearances that arise as objects to our awareness, and these are discursive thoughts and memories, mental images, and these seem to arise from the space of the mind, and there we can watch them like we're watching a movie. But at the same time, there are also subjective mental processes. For example, feelings and emotions, desires, intentions, hopes and fears that arise, which are the mode in which we experience what we perceive. So, for example, we can watch with interest, with compassion, with irritation. And these subjective impulses, these subjective states of mind, they arise from the stream of mental consciousness. So these are the Semjung in Tibetan, the mental emergencies or mental factors. And they are not so much appearing to us like on the screen, but we can still know them because they are the factors that color or configure our awareness of whatever we perceive in terms of the appearances. So when we observe the mental phenomena, we do so with our 6th sense faculty, that of mental perception. So just as we have visual perception, auditory perception, etc., our mind can also perceive the phenomena with mental perception. And according to Buddhist epistemology, mental direct perception, as opposed to, for example, conception, is a valid form of knowledge, and it includes both the so-called mental direct perceivers and self-knowing direct perceivers. So we can, according to Buddhist epistemology, we can directly and reliably perceive both objective appearances and also subjective mental states. So we don't need to resort to inference, for example, or to reading our facial expressions in order to know our emotions, our feelings. We know them directly, even though it's not maybe as obvious. It's slightly more subtle to detect them because they don't appear as if they were on a screen in the cinema of our minds. But we can know them directly, and this is also a form of valid knowledge. So the reason we have access to this is that, as Dharmakirti says, cognition is self-luminous. So at the same time as we are aware of what we're perceiving, we're also aware that we're aware of perceiving it. So when the eye sees blue, we're also aware that it's perceiving blue, for example. So something that I find fascinating to explore is that our perception of the objective phenomena occurs in real time. So as soon as an appearance arises on that movie screen, we see it. We don't see it later. We see it as it appears in real time. Whereas our subjective mental states, we can only become aware of them retrospectively. And this time lag can be shortened by practicing meditation. So the more we hone our ability to detect subtler and subtler and briefer mental events, the more we can shorten that time lag between the arising of mental states and our awareness of those mental states. So this is something we can explore in the practice we're about to do. So let's get on to it. So please find a comfortable posture and let's begin. I will put the timer on. So find a comfortable posture. Your spine straight. Drop your shoulders. And the feet can be flat on the floor. Or you can sit cross-legged. And let's begin first by arousing our most meaningful motivation for this practice. And an aspiration that we all share is to bring about a greater sense of sustainable well-being, both for ourselves and for others. And with this aspiration, let's settle our body, speech, and mind in their natural states. So this settling process is a process of non-doing, of release, of surrender. So I invite you to give yourselves permission to step out of the relentless doing mode, which is very much the default state for a lot of us, and for the 20 minutes of this session to drop into being. Allowing our body to settle in a state of ease, of stillness, of alertness. And we do so not by effort, not by doing anything, but by releasing all doing. Just being present with the body, present to all the sensations that occur within this space. And gradually we can experience a state of greater mental balance, a state where we are utterly relaxed, yet also awake and alert. So take a moment to note, without thinking about it, how it feels to have settled the body, relatively speaking, in this state of ease, of stillness, and of vigilance. We then settle the speech in a state of effortless silence, like a lute on which the strings are cut, as the metaphor goes. And again, we do so by allowing the breath to settle into its natural rhythm, effortlessly breathing in and out, relinquishing any sense of preference or control, not regulating the breath, but letting it flow unimpededly as the body needs to breathe right now. And with each out breath, simply release any thoughts, any mental activities, memories, images that have come up in the meantime. So that with every out breath, we deepen our sense of relaxation, of ease, calming the conceptual turbulence of the mind, soothing our nervous system. And then we settle the mind, allowing it to release any thoughts about the future or the past, any cares and concerns, any hopes or fears, desires and aversions. Let's give our mind a rest, allowing your awareness to come to rest in the immediacy of the present moment. And this happens naturally. The less we busy our mind with thinking, the more we can become aware of being aware. And again, take a moment to note how that feels, to be aware of being aware. How does it feel to you? Connect with that experience. So this is how we settle the mind in a state of ease, of stillness, and of clarity. And from this stillness, from this state of relative mental balance, let's now embark on the main practice of shamatha focused on the mind. And for this practice, the advice is to keep the eyes open, resting your gaze vacantly in the space in front of you, without looking at any visual object, without even looking at the space itself. So to remind ourselves in this practice, the object of mindfulness is the space of the mind and whatever arises within that space. And the aim is to illuminate the movements of the mind from the vantage point of stillness without getting carried away by anything that occurs within the mind. So if you've done this practice before and you're experienced in this practice, I invite you to direct the flow of your mental awareness to the domain of the mind. This domain of experience where a variety of mental phenomena, mental experiences take place. But if you're new to this practice and unsure how to identify the referent, what we mean by the word mind or mental domain, one helpful technique is to deliberately generate a mental event, as this will naturally occur within the space of the mind. So I invite you first to generate a mental image, and this could be anything at all, but let's choose something easy, something that we all know, a piece of fruit, maybe an apple, and bring that mental image of, let's say, the apple vividly to mind. See it in your mind's eye and hold it in awareness. And as you do so, avoid the temptation, resist the temptation to get carried away by thoughts about apples, whether you need to buy some more, whether you like them or not, whether you'd like to eat one. So we observe the image of the apple as we would observe cloud formations in the sky. We watch that image arise, stay for a while, and then disperse. So if you're still holding the image of the apple in your mind's eye, allow that image to now fade away back into the space of the mind from where it arose, and allow your awareness to come back to stillness, to the present moment. And now let's generate another type of mental event, a discursive thought. It doesn't really matter what kind of thought it is. It could be anything at all, because all thoughts occur in the space of the mind. But for the purpose of this meditation, let's generate the thought, it's the weekend. So bring this thought to mind word by word. But like before, let's refrain from thinking the thought, from getting carried away into an episode of mind wandering about weekends, about your plans, about any conceptual associations you have with the word weekend. So the task is simply to bear that thought in mind as a thought, as a mental event, and observe its nature. Its nature as a thought, free from any content. It's simply something that arises in the mind, abides for a while, and dissolves and fades away. And if it hasn't done so already, let that thought fade away. And once again, bring your mind back to stillness, awareness resting in its own place, at ease, still and clear. And now I invite you to generate a memory, maybe of a person that you saw earlier or yesterday, a conversation you had recently, or some other experience you had recently. And allow this memory to come back to you, observing it as clearly as you can. If you found yourself getting carried away with that memory, reliving it, engaging with it, fusing with it, identifying with it, then your attention got derailed. Your awareness has been set in motion and was lured away from its vantage point of stillness, chasing the memory of the past. So when you notice that this has happened, let your first impulse be to relax. Don't beat yourself up about it. Then release the effort of following and reliving the memory. And once you've released it, you can have another go at returning to the task of observing the movements of the mind from the stillness of your awareness. So let's bring this same memory to mind again. And now let's see if we can become aware of not only of the memory as an objective appearance, an appearance to our awareness, something we can look at, as it were, as if we were watching a movie, the movie of the mind, but to become aware of the feelings or emotions or any other mental states that color our awareness of this memory. So can you now direct your mindfulness, which means your ability to bear in mind something with which you're familiar, and your introspection, your reflexive awareness? Can you direct these two faculties to observe the mode in which you experience the memory? So the focus now is not so much the appearance of the memory, but the mental state that colors how we experience the memory. So become aware of the feeling tone of this memory. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? Become aware of any emotions, any intentions, any desires that may be present. And now let this memory too fade into the space of the mind, and with it the feeling or emotion, desire or intention that were associated with the memory. And for the last few moments of this session, let go of all effort, all explorations, all movements and activities of the mind, and allow your awareness to settle back into its own place, relaxed, still, and clear. So in your own time, you can introduce some movement back into the body and return your awareness back to the room, and we'll shift gears a little bit. Oops. Trying to advance the slides. So let me now give you a brief overview of micro-phenomenology, and I can't really do it justice in such a short time, but just to give you a brief overview, it's a research method that I was trained in by Clara Seeger, who developed this approach. It's a qualitative interview method which was adapted for research purposes in the cognitive sciences by Clara Seeger, for exploring the structure of lived experience. And this is inspired by the philosophical tradition of phenomenology, people like Husserl, for example, and by Francisco Varela, a neurophenomenologist, who believed that in order to understand the mind, research cannot be based only on objective data, but requires a rigorous method for studying human experience. This echoes some of the introductory comments made by Courtney today. So in this method, we aim to identify two types of experiential structure. So the temporal unfolding of an experience, which is its diachronic dimension, which means really how an experience unfolds over time, different phases of an experience. And also its multidimensionality or its textural richness at any one point in time. So that will be the synchronic dimension of an experience. So how does an experience feel? How does it manifest at any point in time versus as it unfolds chronologically? So both of these are of interest in microphenomenology because we want to unveil the structure of the experience rather than its content. So the premise of the method is that a large part of our experience remains unrecognized. It's pre-reflective. We're not really fully consciously, explicitly aware of it, as our attention is absorbed in the content of whatever we're doing, of whatever we're observing in the case of the meditation. So we're immersed in the what at the expense of the mode in which we experience a particular experience, the how. And that might remind you of the practice we just did. There are certain parallels there. And importantly, as we only have privileged access to our own minds, participants in this method are treated as co-researchers, as collaborators, rather than subjects in an experiment or guinea pigs. So we are really valuing the perspective. We can't do this practice. We can't use this approach without really the recourse to another person's rich subjective experience on which they are the expert. And there are, as I said, parallels to the meditation of observing the mind versus being absorbed in it, this focus on, the illuminating the how rather than just the what of the experience. So as well as being an interview method, micro-phenomenology also has an analysis method. So this method of analyzing micro-phenomenological descriptions of subjective experience in order to identify possible generic structures of that experience. So we might have a number of interviews. Let's say we have 10 interviews with people, and what we're trying to do in the analysis is find invariants, things that are the same, that apply to not just one person, but seem to be part of the structure of the experience, and several participants have in common. So we find similarities and we find differences, and so we try to identify the generic diachronic structures outlining different phases of a specific experience. As you can see here on the left-hand side, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. For example, to give you an example, there could be different phases leading up to an incident of mind wandering. Mind wandering isn't just something that occurs at one point in time, but it has a certain structure. How does it arise? What are the phases leading up to it? And what happens after the mind-wandering episode subsides? Can we find this structure? Can we detect from the microphenomenological descriptions? Can we identify if there are any phases, the diachronic dimension of this experience? But we're also looking at synchronic structures, which identify certain similarities in how a particular experience manifests at any point in time. Again, to give you an example, what characterizes the experience of grasping to a subjective mental state, or fixating on a particular mental state? How does that manifest? Are there and you can see that sort of diagram here on the right-hand side to illustrate the kind of experiential categories that we might look at in this context. So affective quality, sensory modality, attentional disposition, somatic sensations. These are just some of the categories that we will come up with. And the way we come up with these categories is dictated from the bottom up. So we're not bringing our conceptual framework and imposing it on the data. We're looking at the data and see if we can, by increasing levels of abstraction, find the higher level abstract ways of describing what we're finding, if that makes sense. So we end up with, we could end up with a list of criteria like categories like I've outlined here on this slide. So for example, with this example of grasping to a particular subjective experience, can we detect any common affective qualities? Is this experience of grasping accompanied by a sense of maybe discomfort or dissatisfaction or something like that? Just to give you an example. Or what is the attentional disposition of the person when we are enmeshed in an emotion? How do we, where's our attention? Where are we located? Where's the experience located? How does that actually manifest? So can we detect some similarities by comparing the different interviews we've conducted, and can we, extract a kind of structure without imposing our particular framework on what we find? So when we conduct an micro-phenomenological analysis, we also assess the reliability of descriptions. And there are different ways of establishing how reliable a subjective account is. And I can't, for reasons of time, I can't go into this. But what's important to realize is that when we do this, of course, it's impossible to reconstruct 100% the experience that we are looking at. And just to highlight, we're always looking at a specific experience. We're not talking generally about, what is it like to meditate? We are looking at this experience we just did, for example. How did that pan out? How did that play out? Or whatever other mental phenomena or whatever other experience we are exploring, it's always a singular experience we're looking at, not a generalized account of what is it like, when I feel a bit angry, how did that feel? No, it's a particular specific experience that is located in time and space. That's absolutely key for the reliability of the interview we are and the description we get. So what's important to note is that it's not about reconstructing 100%, which is impossible to do, but so we can't really determine whether the content of the description aligns 100% with the content of the experience that we're talking about. But micro-phenomenology doesn't aim for this correspondist view of reliability, but more a performative view of the reliability of statements, which means that it evaluates the process, the integrity of the process that generated the statements that we got, and whether that was a reliable way. And so we evaluate it in that context, if that makes sense. So now my proposal is to give you a taste of this. And I will now guide you in a practice in which we inquire into our own meditative experience of doing the previous shamatha practice of settling the mind in its natural state by using micro-phenomenological questions. So I like to think of it a little bit like it's a micro-phenomenological vipassana, because we are inquiring into our own experience of doing the practice. So it's normally, as I said, it's an interview method, so it's a dialogue. But given our context, I think it actually lends itself quite well to being a guided meditation. And so I'm not sure if I'm pioneering this approach or whether it's been done before, but I thought we can have a go and see how how that feels, because I wanted to give you that experience, an experiential sense of what that's like. So with that said, let's do another practice. So as we did before, find a comfortable posture. And let's arouse our motivation again, which in the context of this inquiry is to become fully aware of our experience, not just out of curiosity, but in order to gain insight into the processes of our own minds, in order to free us from mental suffering and to bring about greater mental balance and well-being. So again, as we did before, let's take a few moments to settle the body in a state of ease, of stillness, of awakeness. Let your breath settle into its natural rhythm, flowing freely and effortlessly. And with each out-breath, letting go of all the conceptual turbulence that my words might have caused in your mind. And let's settle the mind by allowing awareness to come back to stillness, to the present moment. And now let's begin our exploration of our previous experience of meditating. So in the first step, we evoke the memory of that experience by recalling the moment just before we started meditating. And this will help us locate that moment in time and space, connecting with it, letting it come back vividly. What was the position of your body just before we started the previous meditation? Did you see anything, hear anything, sense anything in that moment? Feel free to close your eyes now and let this moment come back to you in order to recall the felt experience. And I will now pose a series of questions about the unfolding of this experience, your experience, as I guided you through the practice. And as you contemplate the questions that I'm posing, I invite you to stay as close to the direct felt experience as you can, rather than drawing on any conceptual understanding that you have, any theoretical knowledge from scriptures or teachings, meditation instructions, accounts of other meditators, or of a generalized memory of previous meditation sessions that you've had. So this is all about staying close to this specific experience that we just had a few minutes ago. So to begin, recall the moment I invited you to give yourself permission to step out of doing and drop into being. Let that moment come back to you. How specifically did you go about giving yourself permission? What did you do? And if there was more than one thing that you did, what did you do after the first step? If you're drawing a blank, that's okay. Don't overthink it. We then settle the body in a state of relative balance, relaxed yet alert. And I suggested doing so by way of release rather than effort. So bring that experience of settling vividly to mind by letting that memory come back to you in a felt sense, as unfiltered through concepts as possible. So what happened first in this settling process as you experienced it? And what happened thereafter? And when you got to the end of settling the body, I asked you to make a mental note. How does it feel? How does it feel to have settled the body, relatively speaking? And when you feel whatever you're feeling, what is it like to feel this? What is your experience of feeling this? Is this feeling located somewhere? And then when we were settling the respiration, I invited you to relinquish all control or preference over the breath. What specifically is it that you did to do this? How did you relinquish control over the breath? Drawing on your direct, lived experience rather than any theories or concepts in your mind. We then settled the mind, allowing awareness to release all mental activities, come back to the present moment, and becoming aware of being aware. Let that moment come back to you, connect with the experience of this. What is it that you did to release the mental activities, the thoughts, concerns about the future and the past? And when you're aware of being aware, where is your attention? Is it directed anywhere? Is your awareness located anywhere? Do you do anything to be attentive in this way? Are there any sensations or feelings present when you're aware of being aware? If you find yourself getting carried away with this line of questioning, ruminating about it, analyzing, evaluating your experience, rather than bringing to mind the felt experience at the time. Recognize this to be the attentional hyperactivity of excitation and apply the remedies as we did before. Relax your awareness, release the conceptual activity, and return to the stillness of awareness in the present moment. And let's stay here for a while, giving our mind a rest, sustaining the awareness of being aware. And now, direct the light of your awareness back to the previous experience we were exploring, bringing it to mind again with our faculty of mindfulness. So take a moment to let this memory come back to you as an embodied experience rather than thoughts. And recall how I asked you to direct mindfulness to the mental domain. How did you go about doing this? How do you know that you identified the mental domain? And let's now direct our attention to the mental image of the apple that I asked you to imagine. Again, take a moment to recall this experience. And let's explore. When you saw this apple, what exactly did you see? Were there any colors? Was the image clear or fuzzy? Was it stable or fleeting? And where did you view the apple from? Was there a particular perspective, from above, from eye level, in front, to the side? How close were you to the image of the apple? Were you in the scene with the apple, or viewing the apple like looking at a photograph? So let's release that exploration, and for a few more minutes or moments, let's rest in awareness, releasing the effort, settling the mind in its natural state again. And now let's venture out again and explore our experience of the thought. It's the weekend. When I invited you to generate this thought, what did you do to generate it? Did the thought have a location? A form? Did you see it? Hear it? Read it? And when I asked you to view the thought as a thought, where were you located in relation to that thought? Again, if you're getting carried away, relax, release, return. And now, for the last time, let's direct our retrospective mindfulness to the experience of arousing a memory, and let this experience, not the memory itself, become present in your mind. So when you aroused this memory, how specifically did you do this? Is the memory something you saw play out as a movie, as a photograph? Or did it appear in language and words? Did you see anything, hear anything, sense anything, your tactile sensations? And when I invited you to shift from observing the memory as an objective appearance to focusing on the subjective way you experience that memory, how did you go about doing that? Does this shift have a spatial dimension? Is your attention directed somewhere during this process? Do you have a sense of where you are located in relation to the subjective experience that I asked you to observe? And to the extent that there was a sense of I, was it more like a point or more of a field? So whatever mental state you were observing, you became aware of, how did you know it was that state and not another? What was your process of ascertaining this mental state? And now, as this meditation is coming to an end, let go of all effort, all exploration, all activities of the mind. And for one final time, let your awareness come back to its own place, holding its own ground, simply being aware of being aware. So in your own time, bring your awareness back to our shared space. And we're almost there, ready to have a little discussion and explore our experience together in conversation. But I have one final slide just to kind of make some suggestion as to how micro-phenomenology can support our own practice in a multitude of ways. First of all, it can deepen our retrospective mindfulness and introspection by looking at a previous experience, which can then, of course, enhance our prospective and present-centered mindfulness and introspection as we go into further practices in the future. It can also help us recognize the phases that lead up to, for example, attentional imbalances of excitation and laxity through becoming familiar with the process, with the unfolding of such imbalances. It can also help us understand how to restore mental balance through an awareness of these what we call micro gestures or micro acts that we perform to overcome things like cognitive fusion when we get immersed in a particular mental phenomenon, or identification, grasping, fixation, appropriation of mental states. And it can also help us guard against cognitive hyperactivity by keeping our reflections about our practice as non-conceptual as possible and close to direct experience, rather than the conceptual overlay through drawing on theory and scriptures and teachings that we've heard, that we may then conflate with what's actually happening. So it really helps us stay grounded in our felt experience. And it can help us also share our meditative experience with precision with our spiritual mentors. And it can also support the mentors in asking more detailed questions that elicit very non-conceptual responses from us. And last but not least, it can help us, it can help support non-identification with our meditative experience. Rather than getting enmeshed in them, we can observe them with some more objectivity. So that's all I had to share. And now I'd like to open it up to the group, and I'd love to hear from all of you. I have some prompts here just to get us thinking, but they're not meant to be directive, just as sort of prompts to start the conversation. So what insights did you gain from the exploration, from the micro-phenomenological exploration of your experience? Did you become aware of any specific aspects of your experience that had been pre-reflective so far? And how might this kind of inquiry inform your meditation practice? So these are just some suggestions to get us started. So I'd love to hear from you, whoever wants to share anything. Natalia, lovely to see you.
See you too. I just wondered if you would have any suggestion using this methodology. How can we stay closer to the experience? Because my conceptual mind was highly activated. So I wondered if there is any suggestions to keep coming back to the experience. Thank you.
Yeah, it's well, it's a process, and it's a training. So it's really just honing our awareness of the kind of questions we might ask ourselves, and the questions are designed to be content empty, so not suggesting too much. So we wouldn't ask things like what emotions are present necessarily, because that's already imposing the concept of emotions onto the question. So it's really staying as non-conceptual even in the questions we are asking. What, so to not influence the inquiry. And the key, of course, to this method is that it's really important to be in this kind of evocation state. So we need to be in a state where we are connecting with that past experience to such an extent that it becomes so alive to us, more alive than the present moment, as it were. So we're connecting. So that's why I invited you several times during this practice to let that memory of the practice come back to you vividly, and take a moment to really connect with that, rather than immediately jumping to the conceptual abstractions that we normally do, right? So that's really important. So to take the time to let that that state that we were in, that memory that we are recalling, become really, really present, and to really connect with that embodied experience. So I tried as much as I could in this meditation, in this exploration that we did, to allow time to bring that memory back. Because often when we talk about certain, how, in an inquiry process, sometimes in meditation, we talk about how we experience certain things, but we go to our opinions maybe, or to a more generalized memory. So it's really important to remember that specific memory as it was located in space and time, and connect with it in an embodied way. And from that place, then answer the questions, or pose the questions and answer the questions. I hope that that's helpful.
They're very helpful. You actually got precisely to the point. I don't think I stayed longer with the experience. I was rushing to answer it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes. Is that
Uh,
Mary? Yes.
Mary.
Hi.
Hi. I found it very fascinating how the different exercises you gave us unfolded differently for me. So I was when you said the think it's the weekend, right? Or it's the weekend, brought that concept up. That was like completely just words to me, like it was just like a verbal, like I couldn't get, if I wasn't going to like go into some rumination around what weekend means, like if I was going to keep it, so it was just completely verbal. But when we did the recollection of a memory, that was completely different. That experience was much more like a movie, right? And I wasn't in it. I was an observer in the movie. But then when you asked us about the feeling that we had of that memory, and you kind of took us down that path, then I added myself visually to the movie almost, right? So and only at that point could I have that physical sensation of how I felt. Quickly before that, though, I did notice that I did have a label that I put on to the emotion that I was having. So I had this sort of verbal label but I couldn't feel it physically until I added myself to the movie. So I found like the whole experience very, very interesting, that the different processes unfolded differently for me. Like it wasn't always verbal, it wasn't always visual, so that was really fascinating. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting. It sounds that, so there was this the shift then from not being watching the movie, and then you were suddenly in the movie when you were looking at your subjective experiences. Is that right?
Yes, very much so. And I
Yeah.
did not have my subjective experience, it seemed, until I was somehow until I had put myself visually in the play, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And was any of that new to you? Was that something that you hadn't been aware of before, and you became aware of through the inquiry, or was that something you were aware of before?
That I mean, a lot of times I just rest in awareness, so there aren't a lot of like thoughts might arise and come up, but I don't get as involved in specific until I notice I'm ruminating and then bring myself back. I don't really notice the process of what's going on. So yes, that was something new to see. So that's something to think about, so to speak. Think about.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to share how that worked for them? Ronald.
Yes, I was struck by how difficult it was for me to break down my attention into the levels that you were asking questions about. And it suggested to me that I should be focusing more on attentional awareness than I do, obviously. or else, because I almost felt like I was making up things. Okay, so I must have been thinking this or doing this, and I probably was, but it wasn't. It was unclear, very unclear to me. So does this lead to some exercises, or how do you improve your attentional awareness is the question.
Well, it's a good question. Again, it's practice, of course. Normally, and I think this is what for me is became highlighted through the training in micro-phenomenology. And just to say, it is a training. I went through a training to do this. It's not something that I'll give you some questions and off you can run to do this. There's a lot more complexity to it, which I couldn't get into. And it's normally it's a research method rather than what we did here today. I just wanted to give you a taste of the kind of questions we might ask. And of course, the questions we might ask are informed by the research question that we have, what phenomenon we want to investigate for research purposes. So that just to give you a bit of context. But I think what you're drawing attention to is that, we normally, is exactly this point that, we are normally not aware of all the details, that granular detail of what we do, what do we do when we direct our attention to the space of the mind? What does that actually mean in practice? What is the sort of the mental gesture that we are performing, the mental micro act that we are performing to look at it? Is it something that we look at? Is it something that we imagine? Is it something that we feel in our body? And so through asking the questions, which were probably more subtle than our usual exploration of our meditation practice, we're just honing that awareness, and we are actually increasing our clarity in our discernment about what we're doing. So it was just meant as a kind of, as a taster of how precisely we investigate in microphenomenology our experience. We don't stay at the sort of general level. We go really into a lot of subtlety. And through doing that, we, it's a training. We become more trained as we're asking these questions as the micro-phenomenologist, but also the person that we are working with, the co-researcher, the participant in the interview also becomes much more clear about their experience through this process of questioning. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it's a process, and it's something that we once we ask these subtle questions, our answers also become more subtle, and we do become aware, surprisingly, of some aspects of our experience that we just weren't aware of before. And I don't know if that was true for anyone else, and if anyone wants to share anything that along those lines, that something new that you became aware of through the question. Yes, Teresa, is that? Yeah, please. You're muted.
You hear me now?
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, very well.
My experience with the practice is that every time I go to the mind, to be aware of the mind, I hope it's clear because I'm Mexican, so
Absolutely
I hope you understand.
clear.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a feeling of uneasiness, like in my stomach. And I followed all your questions, and I recall all the proceedings, but the feeling of uneasiness, it's always present when I and more accurate when I open my eyes. What advice can you give me?
Well, that's interesting. Were you aware of that before? Is that something that you've been grappling with already?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
I mean, in this
Yes,
practice,
and
yeah.
I am aware of my uneasiness, and I support it, but sometimes it's not pleasant. It's quite difficult for me, and when I close my eyes, it's easier. And when I close my eyes, I am also aware of my mind, and I can stay there for longer times. And the feeling of uneasiness is not as strong when I close my eyes.
Okay, that's
That
interesting.
that uh-huh.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's that
That's
is
it.
what I wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, within the context of this practice where we are observing the mind and all the activities that arise within the mind, the advice would be to just observe what's arising. And if you're observing as you are, you're observing not only the mental events that are appearing as objects, as it were, but also the subjective mental processes and the feeling that arises, which is that subjective mental state that I was talking about. So you're aware of that, and that's one of uneasiness, as you describe it. And the task in this practice is not to identify with it. So you observe it, you get to know it in this self-knowing, self-luminous kind of way. You become aware of it, and you just observe it as a mental event that arises, that stays a while, and that disperses. That's the task in this practice. So we're not identifying with it. We're not letting it, what we're trying to do in this practice is we observe the mental events, but our awareness remains larger than any particular mental event. So we don't let our awareness collapse down to that uneasiness, as if that's, we don't allow that to fill our mind, but we are observing that, we know it from a larger space. And that's why it's so important. I try to do this as much as I could within these meditations, that we always come back, when we get a bit carried away or too upset or dominated by some sort of subjective state. Always relax, release, return back to the stillness of awareness, and then we can venture out again. But yeah, it's basically not to identify with that state, and just observe it as a mental event that arises in the mind, which is the practice. Yeah, I hope it's helpful, but
Thank you very much.
that's what I would
Yes.
say to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we do have one question in the
anyone else?
chat from Susan,
Yes.
asking if you can relate, how does this method relate to cultivating a greater sense of well-being?
That's a very good point, because that Lara Blinkber tells us that this is a practice that is, that we can expect to experience a greater sense of well-being, and it's precisely through that process of observing the mind without being dominated or held hostage by it, which is what we normally do, right? When we do experience some upset or some sort of afflictive state of mind, and it dominates our mind, then we are really slaves of our minds. And so the practice is to is really healing in a way, because we can learn to just watch the mind without being dominated by it, but without being enslaved by it, without being enmeshed in it. And so we cultivate that greater sense of freedom through non-identification with the mind. And so we can learn that whatever rubbish can arise in our mind, we don't need to be upset. There might be upset arising, but we cultivate this greater sense of awareness, the stillness of awareness, from which we observe those particular subjective appearances. And they're just subjective mental states in this case. And they're just something that arises in the mind. And we just, like the image of the observing the sky and the clouds. So, the sky is always there, and there might be dark clouds and lighter, fluffy clouds. And even the dark and menacing clouds, they will just arise and pass at some point. And that's exactly the spirit in which we observe the mind. So we learn not to be subjugated by the mind, but cultivate a greater sense of awareness, which can be aware of unpleasant subjective mental states without with the awareness still being clear and not afflicted itself. So it's the mental factors may be afflictive, but we are observing them from this larger space. So that's how we can cultivate a greater sanity, I would say. Any other questions, comments, observations?
Actually, I do have a kind of follow-up observation. Maybe it's a
Yeah,
question, but um, just thinking about, I think that usually, you know, at least in the Western cultural context, we have this idea of like there's um, scientific research over here on the one hand that's hard and objective, and kind of like indifferent to how people feel. And then on the other hand, there is woo-woo stuff like meditation and journaling, and you know, maybe more like what they even call like the like soft sciences like psychology and things like that. And it seems like this method that you were talking about today is kind of based on your answer that you just gave, is kind of like bringing these two together in a non-woo-woo way. You know, I mean, that's not a very intelligent way to say it, but you know, hopefully that's clear.
yeah.
Because I don't know if you have more, I would love to just hear you talk a little bit more about that, and you know, how this might change our conception of you know, science and well-being, and how these two things are related.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the very aim of an approach called neurophenomenology, of which micro-phenomenology is a part. It's basically bringing together the first person and the third person perspectives on experience. So, you know, but rather than prioritizing the neuroimaging methods, for example, if we use EEG or we use fMRI or whatever the case may be, and just having recourse to the subjective experience just to supplement what we're doing on the objective side, in this approach of radical neurophenomenology, which is very much the approach that I want to implement in my research. It's really to prioritize the subjective first-person experience. We're in this with this precision and subtlety that I try to convey in some of the questions that I used in order to inform how we do the objective side. You know, how do we because you know, how can we I mean, for, you know, in processes like mind wandering or cognitive fusion or grasping or fixating on some sort of afflictive emotion, it's really through that first person exploration that we can get that subtlety that allows us to then conduct the objective measures with greater subtlety and refinement. We need that first person perspective, and we can bring them together in a very fruitful way, which is what neurophenomenology is all about, which is what you know, which is the context in which I'm doing this. But yeah, I think the first person experience has to be the starting point. And by doing it in the most scientific way possible, and microphenomenology is really a very as maybe you have a little bit of a sense now that it is very subtle, and you know, by collecting these fine-grained description, the granular descriptions, precise descriptions of an experience that we conduct in a, you know, that we get in an interview that we conduct, by getting a series of these, we can then extract from these descriptions the generic structures and really see with great detail, you know, how do these experiences unfold in time and how do they manifest at any point in time, and that can then inform how we do an EEG or an fMRI investigation. So for me, it's very much the other way around. But and obviously, we need to bring as much precision and scientific rigor to the process of the first-person investigation. And I think micro-phenomenology is a very scientific, for a first-person qualitative method. It's a very scientifically, rigorous method. Because we are not just talking about impressions and thoughts and generalizations, but we're looking at a specific experience under certain conditions of evoking that experience with detail and then asking very, very specific questions. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
So a lot of other great context. Yeah, I appreciate it.
One other thing, is there another place that we can go for more information? Are there any literature on it or anything like that? A website, something where it's being done, where we can kind of...
Yes. There is. I can't remember the URL now, but if you put micro-phenomenology in the Google search, it'll come up with the website, which is about this method, the interview method, the analysis method, and there are also some YouTube clips, I think, about that. I can share. I'm very happy to share my presentation, and I will put references at the end on the last slide, so that you can look up some interesting research that Claire Petit-Marjan and other researchers have done on, especially also on meditation, which is what I'm particularly interested in. So yeah, you can find out more about that that way. So I'm happy to share the presentation.
Yeah, we'll definitely include that when we send out the recordings next week. I do see one more question in the chat from Allison. Is there an influence of Daniel Stern's work on microphenomenology? It seemed pretty similar.
Well, the easy answer is that I'm not very familiar. I'm not familiar at all, actually, with his work. So apologies. I can't answer that question. Louis.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you very much for the teaching and all. It was very interesting. And first of all, I wanted to ask you, is it this concept of micro-phenomenology like extension of the idea of introspection, in the sense that introspection, you try to evaluate the quality of your attention, but here it's like we're going one step further, like doing analytical meditation about your introspection or something like that. That's what I felt. That's one question. And then if I can, I ask another one.
Yes. Yes, I mean, just to, as a caveat, the way I introduced it, as a form of, in the form of a guided meditation, that was my maybe unorthodox way of doing it, because it's an interview method, right? But I just wanted to give you a taste. So I thought, actually, it really lends itself to being an analytical meditation, a kind of vipassana meditation. So, but you're absolutely right. It is an introspective method, and as such, it does. I find from my experience of it that it, and also from people, from people's descriptions in their interviews, that it does hone our introspective skills through the questions. So it does really, it is introspective, because we're looking at our subjective experience, and we are going from looking at the outside world to looking at our mind, which we do in meditation. And not only that, but we're looking at how we're looking at our minds, what we're doing when we are, observing the mind. So it's kind of like a microcosm, or and so definitely it's very introspective, and it really hones introspective skills, I think, both for the interviewer and for the participant, or the co-researcher, as I like to call them. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
And then regarding the research, I was wondering, like, do you do this research to only advanced meditators, like because they have more experience and they can explore these questions maybe more like finer, or do you do this research on anyone? And when you do this research, like, I guess this is qualitative data, and then you try to relate it to the quantitative data that you find from the scanners and this kind of. Could you share a
Yeah.
little bit more on how this goes? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, my starting point, and it might I don't want to go into too much detail at this stage because
Okay.
I'm aware of time and I don't want to
Sorry.
outstay my welcome, but I'm very happy to share this, and maybe on a in another occasion I can go into more detail. But yeah, it's mainly with well, it is with I'm focusing on advanced meditators, but advanced experienced meditators, let's say experienced, not novices.
Okay.
And of course, as you say, they're more able to see the subtleties, to experience and to describe with greater subtlety also the experiences that they're having. As I said, I'm doing radical neurophenomenology, so I'm prioritizing the subjective accounts, the micro-phenomenological qualitative data, in order to then inform how I'm going to look at EEG and how I will, EEG being the imaging technique that I'm going to use, how that will inform what I'm looking at. But it's really with the first point of call is the subjective side for me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't know if there's any other question or whether we should wrap it up. I'm happy to answer any more questions or hear any more reflections, observations. Anyone wants to share anything? Doesn't look like it, so. So, well, in that case, I just want to thank you all for your attention and apologize for my technical issues. I don't know what happened there, but suddenly everything broke down, but for no apparent reason. And I could just, I had to settle my mind in its natural state, observe it without getting enmeshed in any sort of panic. And that's what this practice actually helps us do, that we can just observe, oh, there's a sense of anxiety here, but I don't have to identify with it. I can just observe it and just do what I need to do to get back into the call, which finally worked. So thank you very much for bearing with me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your comments and observations. And I hope it was interesting in some way and helpful. And yeah, so I look forward to seeing you all again at some later stage. So thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for all the hearts.
Thank you.
Rejoice.
Clara.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.